Okay, let's unpack this. Here's a number that might make you sit up straight. Around 90%?
90% of what?
90% of business process reengineering efforts, those big attempts to overhaul how a company works, they end up failing.
Wow, 90%. That's huge.
It really is. Think about that for a moment. You've probably been in meetings, maybe even leading projects where a big organizational change was promised.
Hmm.
A lot of energy went in, and then, well, nothing much really changed in the end. Sound familiar?
It really does. And, unfortunately, those high failure rates aren't just for reengineering. We see similar struggles across all sorts of organizational transformations.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why is it so incredibly difficult to make real, lasting change actually stick?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're diving deep into today. We're looking at some fascinating ideas from the book Transforming Your Leadership Culture.
Ah, by McGuire and Rhodes. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Right. And our mission for you, the listener who's shared these sources with us, is to kind of cut through the noise. We want to get a clear understanding of why organizational change can feel like pushing a boulder uphill.
Good analogy.
And more importantly, what practical steps can actually be taken by focusing on something fundamental, leadership culture. So, yeah, get ready for some insights that might just click.
I think they will. What McGuire and Rhodes argue so compellingly is that the secret sauce, if you like, for successful change isn't just about tinkering with new systems or updating processes on their own.
Right, not just shuffling boxes on the org chart.
Exactly. It's about getting to the heart of the matter, transforming the shared beliefs and, crucially, the day-to-day practices of an organization's leaders.
Okay, so the beliefs and the actions, they make this powerful point that every leadership culture operates based on a kind of internal logic.
Yeah, consistent set of assumptions and behaviors. It's like the operating system underneath everything.
And to truly shift an organization's trajectory, you have to address and, well, evolve this underlying logic.
That's the core idea.
Yeah.
And they even identify 3 basic types of leadership culture that we're going to dig into.
Okay, great. So settle in, because this is where we get to the core of why change succeeds or stalls.
Indeed. So one of the foundational arguments in the book is that traditional change management often overlooks a really critical dimension.
What's that?
Well, these traditional approaches tend to concentrate on what the authors call the outside in,
Outside in, meaning?
meaning they focus on the tangible stuff, structures, workflows, technologies, and try to optimize those things.
Okay, the typical playbook, right? New software, redesign reporting lines, maybe new office layout.
Exactly. All potentially useful things, sure.
Right.
But McGuire and Rhodes pose this really insightful question.
Which is?
They ask, even if I perfectly align all the management systems and structures, is this organization's leadership truly equipped to navigate the inevitable uncertainties of the future?
Ah, okay. So you can have the best systems, but if the leaders aren't ready.
That's the key disconnect.
Yeah.
Their argument is that without simultaneously addressing the inside out,
Inside out being.
the prevailing mindsets, the deeply held beliefs, the collective capabilities of the leaders themselves, without that, those outside-in changes are very likely to fall short.
So the leadership just might not have the, I don't know, the internal compass or the collaborative skills to handle what comes next.
Precisely. They might not have the muscles to steer through the complexities that inevitably emerge when you try to change things significantly.
Got it. They also take aim at this persistent myth of the all-powerful CEO.
Ah, yes, the great person theory.
Right. The idea that you just need one heroic figure at the top, a visionary leader, to single-handedly drive all the changes, the just trust George to fix it mentality. But what they reveal is how this actually undermines change. It discourages everyone else from feeling empowered to, contribute and take responsibility.
And what's fascinating here is how this myth can inadvertently create this sense of disempowerment. It's subtle sometimes. Well, people start looking upwards for all the answers. They wait for the top-down directives.
And effectively give away their own initiative, their own problem-solving abilities.
Exactly, because they believe significant change can only originate from the very, very top.
It's like everyone's waiting for the conductor to wave the baton, and if music's off, well, it must be the conductor's fault.
That's a good way to put it. Plus, McGuire and Rhodes emphasize a really crucial point about culture itself.
Which is?
It's not a machine. You can't just tinker with it or control it through policies and procedures like you would a system.
Because culture is fundamentally human. It's about relationships, shared understanding.
Exactly. You can't just fix it with a memo or, manipulate it with incentives. People are inherently resistant to feeling like cogs in a machine.
Yeah, that makes sense. Real sustainable change needs what?
Right.
Authentic engagement.
Genuine involvement from everyone who's part of that culture. You have to engage people, not just manage them.
Okay. So, if that traditional outside-in approach often misses the mark, what's the alternative?
Well, McGuire and Rhodes are pretty clear. True transformation starts with a significant leap forward
A leap in what?
in the core beliefs and the everyday practices within the organization's leadership culture itself.
Ah, back to the leader's beliefs and actions.
Yes. In their words, change leadership's beliefs and you change the culture.
Okay, that sounds almost too simple.
Well, as the authors themselves point out, don't mistake simplicity for ease. Shifting deeply entrenched beliefs and long-standing practices, that's a really significant and often challenging piece of work.
I can imagine. So how do you start? They introduce this really useful concept they call leadership logics.
Yes, leadership logics. Think of these as the distinct, consistent, underlying mindsets that fundamentally shape how leaders tend to think, how they make decisions, how they interact.
So like default settings.
Kind of. They give a great example of what they term the dependent-conformer logic.
Okay, what does that look like?
In that logic, the implicit assumption is that a leader's main job is to give clear orders,
And everyone else's job is.
to execute those orders without much question.
Right. Very hierarchical.
Very. And what's really critical to understand about this kind of logic is that it inherently defines and limits who is even seen as a leader.
How do you mean?
It often overlooks or even actively excludes those unofficial leaders.
Ah, the people without the formal titles but who have influence.
Exactly. The individuals with deep expertise or strong relationships or just a respected voice within the organization, they might not be seen as leaders in this logic.
And that raises a really important question for you, the listener, doesn't it? What untapped potential might exist in your organization?
hmm Potential you could unlock by more actively recognizing and leveraging the influence of these unofficial leaders.
Yeah. How many valuable ideas or crucial initiatives might be just sitting there languishing simply because they aren't coming from someone with the right title?
It's a powerful thought. The authors also challenge that old lead, follow, or get out of the way mentality.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that one. Sounds
Uh,
tough and decisive.
It might sound assertive, sure, but on the surface, underneath, it inadvertently reinforces the idea that leadership is scarce, that it's reserved for a select few at the top.
But McGuire and Rhodes argue differently.
They argue that in today's complex world, organizations actually need as many leaders as we can get,
At all levels.
at all levels.
Yeah.
They essentially see the traditional notion of passive followers as a significant underutilization of talent.
So the really successful organizations, the ones they've studied.
They actively strive to cultivate leadership qualities and empower individuals to take initiative, regardless of their formal position.
Okay, that makes sense. Empowering everyone.
Which brings us nicely to the three fundamental types of leadership culture that the book lays out, each one characterized by its own prevailing leader logic.
All right, let's get into them. What's the first one?
The first is the dependent-conformer culture.
Dependent-Conformer. Okay, let's dive into this one. What are the hallmarks?
Well, the emphasis is heavily on hierarchy, on adherence to rules. Authority flows strictly top-down.
And there's a strong expectation to respect the established ways of doing things, the organizational code, as they call it.
Exactly. Knowledge tends to be concentrated among senior leaders. Think of a very traditional, maybe bureaucratic organization where protocol is really important.
Okay, I can picture that.
And what's really interesting to observe here is the often deeply ingrained, unspoken ethic.
An unspoken ethic, like
These things to be us first, me second.
us first, me second. So strong collective identity, loyalty to the group, prioritizing the existing order.
Precisely. Maintaining those established norms is key.
And this dependent-conformer culture is often populated by leaders with specific logics.
Yes, they mention logics like the specialist, the deep technical expert who stays in their lane.
Okay.
The moderator, the person who prioritizes harmony, avoids conflict, doesn't rock the boat. And the dominator, the more authoritarian figure who wants tight control and directs others clearly.
Right. Got it. Okay, what's the second type?
The second distinct type is the independent achiever culture. Independent achiever. Sounds different already.
It is. Here, you see a significant shift in emphasis. Authority tends to be more distributed, often to individual managers.
Correct.
And the dominant mindset, it becomes centered around adapting quickly to the market, outperforming the competition.
Through individual initiative and results.
Exactly. Think of maybe a highly competitive, sales-driven organization that often fits this mold.
And the unspoken ethic here, does that change too?
It often flips. It becomes more me first and us second.
Ah. So the focus shifts to individual success, personal achievement.
Yes, and a belief that the sum of all those individual wins will ultimately lead to the organization's overall success.
And the leader logics here, are they different?
They often are. Leaders within this culture frequently operate with a performer logic, highly focused on hitting targets, demonstrating success.
Makes sense.
Or maybe a free thinker logic, someone who's more innovative, challenges the norms, operates with more autonomy.
Okay. Dependent-Conformer, independent achiever. What's the third one? Now, the third type, and perhaps the one that represents a more evolved or adaptive state, is the interdependent-collaborator culture.
Interdependent-Collaborator. Okay, tell me about this one.
This is characterized by shared authority. Decision-making is often based on strategic competence, meaning the individuals with the relevant expertise for a particular challenge are empowered to lead, regardless of their formal title.
Ah, okay. So competence over hierarchy.
Right. And there's a strong emphasis on seamless collaboration across traditional boundaries, like departments or functions.
So breaking down silos, like maybe a cutting-edge tech company where teams form and disband fluidly based on project needs.
That's a great example. The core mindset here is that complex problems require collective intelligence.
And developing innovative solutions means you have to break down those silos.
Absolutely. Success isn't just measured by individual accomplishments, but by the organization's collective ability to integrate diverse systems and capabilities.
To achieve shared goals now and in the future.
Exactly. And mistakes, they're viewed differently here.
How so?
Not as personal failures, but as valuable opportunities for learning and systemic improvement at all levels.
That sounds like a healthier approach.
Yeah,
And the ethics shifts again.
it does. It becomes more focused on the health and effectiveness of the entire system. There's a belief that the organization should work for the benefit of all stakeholders, right across the value chain.
And the leaders. What logics do they embody?
Often a collaborator logic, actively seeking win-win solutions, fostering strong partnerships.
Okay.
Or even a transformer logic, someone who can really catalyze significant positive change that benefits the wider system, not just their own area.
Wow. Okay, those three types are really distinct. Dependent conformer, independent achiever, interdependent collaborator.
And as you're listening to these descriptions, it's a really valuable exercise. Just pause for a moment.
Yeah.
And honestly, consider which of these three types of leadership culture most closely reflects the environment you currently operate in.
That's a good prompt for reflection. Okay, moving beyond these cultural types, the book introduces some really fundamental concepts for understanding and driving transformation.
Yes, some core building blocks.
One key framework is DAC.
Right. Direction, alignment, and commitment.
Okay. What's the important thing about Depot, according to them?
What's particularly important is their emphasis that these aren't just abstract management goals. They originate as essential qualities of healthy human systems.
Not just computer systems or efficient processes.
Exactly. You can't just mandate or program direction, alignment, and commitment into an organization. It has to emerge from the people.
They draw a helpful distinction, too, between a manager's tasks and a leader's work.
They do. Traditional manager tasks often involve things like planning, staffing, budgeting, the organizing aspects.
Right.
But the core work of a leader, that's focused on setting clear direction, fostering genuine alignment among people, and cultivating deep commitment to shared goals.
So the same person can do both, but they need different mindsets, different approaches.
Distinctly different, yes. One is more about organizing resources, the other about mobilizing people.
Got it. Another absolutely foundational concept they introduce is this distinction between inside out and outside in.
Yes, we touched on this earlier, but it's worth digging into. Outside in is primarily concerned with the objective, quantifiable stuff.
Tasks, systems, structures, metrics.
Right, the things you can easily see and measure. Inside out, on the other hand, delves into the more subjective, relational dimensions.
People's perceptions, the quality of relationships, the underlying cultural norms and beliefs.
Exactly, the often invisible dynamics.
And they argue that being able to navigate between these two, the tangible tasks and the intangible relationships, that's critical.
They make a really compelling case. that the ability to consciously and effectively navigate between these perspectives is one of the most vital skills for any leader wanting to drive meaningful change.
Why? Because if you treat relationships like just another task,
You're likely overlooking the deeper stuff, the hidden dynamics that truly shape how people behave and how the organization functions.
they use an example to illustrate this, right? Government bureaucracies.
Yes, it's quite insightful. They point out that many bureaucracies are often characterized by a strong emphasis on formal rules, detailed processes, hierarchical
A
structures.
very outside-in focus.
Very much so.
Mm.
But they can sometimes struggle with genuine human connection, responsiveness, adaptability.
The inside-out dimension.
Exactly. The rules are clear, but the human element might be lacking or constrained.
And this leads naturally into the idea that a lot of culture operates unconsciously.
Yes, that a significant portion of an organization's culture operates below the surface, at an unconscious level.
So these deeply held, often unspoken beliefs and assumptions drive behavior without people even realizing it.
Precisely. They exert a powerful influence on decisions, interactions, everything, often in ways the decision-makers themselves aren't consciously aware of.
They share a fantastic anecdote about this, don't they? The chairs anecdote.
Oh yeah, the chairs, it's great. About a bank where even senior vice presidents felt this palpable unease.
About sitting in the executive chairs on the executive floor during informal meetings, even when no executives were around.
Exactly. What's so illuminating about that seemingly minor example is how vividly it shows the invisible yet incredibly potent force of ingrained cultural norms.
If something as simple as choosing where to sit is governed by these unconscious beliefs,
Imagine the impact on far more complex, strategically significant decisions. It's profound.
wow. Okay, so how do you deal with that unconscious stuff? This brings us to the zone of intentional change.
Yes. This concept is about actively working to increase conscious awareness within the organizational operating space,
Bringing more of what happens on autopilot into conscious thought.
into the realm of deliberate intention, exactly. It's about making more mindful, more effective choices that are aligned with consciously defined goals.
They describe this as creating headroom, right?
Yes, creating headroom for more effective action, making space for conscious choice.
And that connects directly to the notions of readiness and headroom.
Right. Readiness in this context refers to a leader's both individual and collective preparedness to navigate the challenges of change.
And this preparedness depends on their assumptions about.
About things like time frames involved, their inherent need for control versus shared control, and their core intentions behind the change itself.
They briefly mention three forces of readiness: time, control, intentions, hinting there's more there.
Yes, implying a deeper dive is possible on that topic. And then there's headroom itself,
Which is defined as
as the dedicated space and time that is intentionally created within the organization for the systemic development of the leadership culture.
so not just focusing on tasks, but actually carving out time for the culture itself to evolve.
Exactly. Headroom is about fostering genuine dialogue, encouraging open internal communication, promoting collective learning and reflection.
It sounds like it signifies a shift in the social dynamics.
A fundamental shift, yes, towards a new dynamic characterized by growing mutual trust, increased belief in each other's capabilities, and a shared commitment to evolving together.
They also touch on their culture development cycle, CDC, a framework for this transformation.
Briefly, yes, they mention one specific phase, the inside-out role-shifting experience phase.
What happens there?
It's a critical stage where leaders begin to fundamentally shift their perceptions of their own identity and their roles.
Becoming more aware of who you are and what you stand for.
Exactly. So you can become a more effective guide and catalyst for change. It's deep work.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, another vital concept: engagement.
Yes, and this goes way beyond just participation or ticking boxes.
What do they mean by engagement then?
It's the deep sense of connectedness that truly determines how effectively people interact, how readily they learn together, and how successfully they tackle ambiguous, complex problems collaboratively.
And it requires both perspectives, inside out and outside in.
It requires both, absolutely. But they emphasize that the inside-out connection, the human relationships, the shared understanding is the very essence of true engagement.
And this deep engagement is fundamental for DAC: direction, alignment, commitment.
Absolutely fundamental for establishing clear direction, achieving genuine alignment, and fostering strong commitment to the vision.
They also connect engagement levels to the leader logics we talked about earlier.
They do. They observe that Engagement tends to be significantly lower in organizations where those earlier stage logics like dependent-conformer are dominant.
Because there's less trust, less open dialogue.
Often, yes. They provide a really compelling example from a fictional company, Technology Inc.
What happens there?
An employee named Kim openly questions the prolonged absence of a colleague, Jim. It's a bit uncomfortable at first.
It leads to.
A much broader, more honest conversation about underlying issues within the team. It breaks the ice.
Ah, so that anecdote shows the power of real engagement, that psychological safety.
Exactly. The trust that allows people to raise difficult issues, engage in honest dialogue without fear. It highlights that collective relief when tough things can finally be discussed constructively.
Okay. Then there's intentionality.
Yes, another crucial element. This is about having a clear, compelling sense of purpose.
That goes beyond just self-interest or hitting quarterly numbers.
Precisely. It involves deeply connecting your personal passion and values to that higher cause.
And having the courage and commitment to stick with it, even when it gets tough.
Yes, unwavering commitment. It's about actively and consciously using that zone of intentional change we discussed.
They give examples of leaders with strong intentionality.
They do. People like Jack Welch and his relentless focus on Six Sigma quality. Jimmy Carter's deep commitment to peace. Steve Jobs' unwavering vision for personal tech. Andre Young at Avon too.
But they also contrast this.
Yes, with a leader at another fictional company, PSI. His stated intentions for sustainable transformation were good, but they were ultimately overshadowed by an overriding focus on short-term profit. The actions didn't match the stated intent.
Ah, okay. Intentionality needs follow-through.
Absolutely. Though they also highlight Bart at Technology Inc. as a positive example of fostering broad collective intentionality across the organization, not just one person's vision.
Interesting. They also briefly touch on the leader's individual control source.
Yes, their inherent comfort level. Are they more comfortable exercising tight control or embracing shared control and distributed decision-making? It's a spectrum.
And their personal time sense.
Right. The ability to move beyond just a short-term, bottom-line focus and consider longer-term implications, the right pace for sustainable change.
And they caution against pushing change too fast.
They wisely caution against the pitfalls of trying to force transformational change too quickly. People need time to adapt.
Which leads, I guess, to the final point about feasibility.
Exactly. A critical reality check. Not all organizational cultures have the same inherent capacity or readiness to change.
Or to change to the same degree or at the same speed.
Right. So it's absolutely essential to realistically assess both the feasibility of the desired change and the organization's current readiness before launching big initiatives.
Otherwise, you risk becoming part of that 90% failure statistic.
Very likely. They remind us of those high failure rates of efforts that ignore the necessary inside-out stretch required of people, the human capacity element.
And they briefly mention feasibility maps as a tool for this, hinting there's more detail elsewhere.
Yes, another area potentially for a deeper dive later on.
Okay, so as we begin to bring this deep dive to a close, let's quickly recap some of the core insights for you, the listener.
Good idea.
We've explored why traditional change approaches often fall short, mainly by neglecting leadership culture and the underlying mindsets.
Right, that critical inside-out dimension. We've also looked at those three distinct types of leadership culture: dependent-conformer, independent achiever, and interdependent collaborator.
And the characteristic logics that drive them. We've also highlighted the importance of key concepts.
Like inside-out versus outside-in, the power of unconscious beliefs, the need for genuine engagement, and the driving force of clear intentionality.
Hopefully this whole exploration has sparked some genuine aha moments for you. Maybe provided a clearer lens to understand why some changes work and others just don't.
We really encourage you now to take a few moments, maybe later today, just to reflect on your own experiences with organizational change. Use these insights.
Yeah, think about it. What type of leadership culture do you truly recognize in your own environment? Be honest.
And maybe even more personally, what kind of leadership logic might be most prevalent in yourself and within the teams you work most closely with?
Because considering that culture so profoundly shapes our choices and ultimately guarantees repeated results.
Here's that final thought-provoking question for you to consider, to mull over after this discussion ends.
What single deeply held belief, if you could intentionally shift it within your organization's leadership culture?
What single belief could potentially unlock the most significant positive change and create the most promising future for your organization?